What attracts me to Esalen is its transformational approach. We're looking at people and asking, what can we be that we're not being? What can we adopt or forgo to make our world a better place? There's hope at Esalen to engage our vast human potential.
I didn't consider myself a hippie, and I certainly didn't consider myself a feminist. I didn't need to be a feminist. I already was very independent. But I had been a seeker without knowing it. And I just felt like I had come home. And I hadn't known I wasn't home before.
The people I knew, we weren't seekers in that kind of way. As someone who was born in 1940, I was not a feminist woman. That's not where I came from. I stayed with my original New York City, Upper West Side Jewish culture.
As the 1960s unfolded, American culture evolved. The idealized housewife, serving her nuclear family, became a symbol of rigid gender roles and conformity. A wave of rebellion and social change took hold, counterculture, and with it, new forms of freedom and self-expression. Young people exploring ideas and lifestyles, calls for human rights, civil rights, and an end to American intervention abroad. This was a time of immense change and upheaval. American culture was shifting from the so-called traditional values of the past to new possibilities and paradigms.
There's a whole psychedelic revolution happening. I came when it was first starting, and psychedelics were legal.
Everything is in color, and I can feel the air. I can see it. I can see all the molecules. It's here. Can't you feel it?
I had been going to a psychotherapist who was giving me psychedelics. And when I wanted to have another experience, he said, okay, on one condition, that you go down to this place called Big Sur Hot Springs for the weekend. And there was no workshop that weekend. It was just staff. So there were perhaps 25 people on the property. I mean, I couldn't have been welcomed more. I mean, I couldn't believe it. All these people were so happy to see me. You know, I was living in a 6 by 12-foot trailer with no bathroom, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven. I was there for a year and a half, and I remember when I got that place, I said, I'm staying here for a year, even if I cry every single day. There was just something I knew was important.
I was married with 2 little children. There was no trace of a hippie in me, not a single dot of hippie. We're talking about 1968. My then husband had read the Look magazine article from George Leonard about Esalen, and he was fixated on wanting to go to Esalen, and I'm like, well, whatever. And he did. He went and took a 5-day workshop taught by Gabrielle Roth, who was pregnant with Jonathan at the time, 9 months pregnant, teaching a workshop called Yoga, Movement, and Massage. He came home from that just like his life had changed, and I was like, not a change I'm interested in. I stayed with my comedy writer friends. Some years went by and I was not very happy, and I knew I needed something, and the Esalen catalog would show up because David had been there. And I thought, okay, I've always been interested in psychology. Maybe I'll take something that has to do with psychology and I'll go. And I signed up for a 5-day workshop called Gestalt Practice, taught by Esalen Gestalt staff. Okay, and the Esalen Gestalt staff was Dick Price. and his lovely wife, Chrissy. It was as though some magic thing had happened to me, and the word I is like, I feel, I am, I was a whole new concept to me.
My first trip to Esalen was in about 1970, and that was difficult. The women, it was the women who were, Michael's girlfriend. This didn't settle right, and it was hard. So it took a long time for me to be sort of accepted here at Esalen, a very long time. But eventually I did. When I met Michael Murphy, I'd never heard of Esalen Institute. This was 1970. And I was invited to go to a party with some people from Esalen. I had just separated from my first husband, and I just wasn't ready. So I finally waited several months, and then he invited me to this party. And I climbed up a ladder outside of George Leonard's house and peeked in the window to see what these hairy apes were going to look like from Esalen. And Will Schutz was there, Michael was there, and George was writing a musical. So they were all having a great time. But I looked in the window and I looked around and I saw this guy and I thought, wow, I can do that. So I went in and spent the evening there, and it was fun. Learned more about what was going on, definitely the outsider and all this. And Michael and I sort of connected. 50-some years later, here we are.
I had been a trained ballet dancer, and I had stopped a couple of years before coming here, and I was quite lost because it had consumed so much of my life. At some point over the weekend, people said, oh, come on, we're going to go out to the point, and, they brought drums. I didn't know from drums. They started drumming, and I started dancing. And I started dancing in a way that I had never danced before because there wasn't a mirror in front of me. And I wasn't being given prescribed steps to do. And that was just extraordinary. It was, I didn't even know that experience existed. Yeah, I don't know that I was seeking my own potential. I was just so happy to feel at home. I was a nice Jewish girl from Park Avenue. We didn't move to the mountains of Big Sur.
My career was in television broadcasting. I was working for CBS News in New York City. I was invited at September of 2005 to give a talk at the Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy. I come from an interfaith home, a Christian mother, a Muslim father. It was the Beyond Fundamentalism series, which was really breakthrough, skyrocket out of the world kind of study of religious fundamentalism and pulling it apart and looking at what made people or enticed them into these extreme behaviors that were completely antithetical to what their religions were proposing.
As promised, President Carter today stopped the export of high-technology equipment to Russia. White House Press Secretary Jody Powell says that Carter went far beyond his original plan.
I had been hosting Soviets when they would come to this country, both in Big Sur and in LA. We were constantly under the threat of our two countries destroying each other. And I was frightened to death. Anytime I heard there was a conflict anywhere in the world, I thought, that's it, we're done for. So to have an opportunity to bring these two countries together was just like, oh my God, this is in my wildest dreams, to be a part of that.
I first went to the Soviet Union in 1980. Carter had boycotted the Olympics.
I have notified the Olympic Committee that with Soviet invading forces in Afghanistan, neither the American people nor I will support sending an Olympic team to Moscow.
And Michael and I, through Jim Hickman, met someone from the State Department that was working with this whole issue of cancellation. And he said, why don't you just go anyway? And I thought, yay. And so we went. We began this work in the mid-'80s because tensions between the U.S. and Soviet Union were at a boiling point. We were fostering dialogues between intellectuals, policymakers, and citizens of the two nations. The goal was to discuss politics, culture, and spirituality. It was our part to help thaw relations between these two superpowers. Those conferences and cultural exchanges were attended by government officials, academics, artists, and activists here, which then established the Soviet-American Exchange Program. That work helped build bridges and create opportunities for cross-cultural dialogue, cooperation, and understanding.
I said, this is my work. It's as if someone had taken me by my shirt and just pulled me in and said, this is what you can do.
I came as a work scholar. At home, I worked with people, getting people to sing. I worked with actors who were not great singers. That was my favorite. And so we put on a musical review. It was 3.5 hours long. Everyone on staff was in it. And Dick Price came in and he said, well, what do you want here? And I said, well, I'd like to come and live here with my kids. And he said, okay. And that's how I got here. That's how I left my marriage. This Deus Ex Machina just went, here you go. And then I had to figure out what I was going to do. It was a thrilling time of experimentation and exploration. We scouted visionary voices with new ideas, practices, and modalities to lead workshops. This diversity of thinking shaped many of the practices in the mainstream today. In the beginning, some workshops were poorly attended. It took time for people to catch on, but I was persistent because I could see their potential. It was all experimental. Some things lasted and what didn't faded away. It was exciting to see these once radical ideas become integrated into the culture.
I love that we're exploring the impact of technology on the human soul and psyche. I would also love to see Esalen be looking more at what is happening in our world today, especially in terms of how people recover from conflict, how they recover from war. I would like to see Esalen take a look at how people heal.
There was an Israeli woman who was here who taught in Israel. She was here teaching a workshop, and the two of us got together and was like, oh, you've got to bring them. Because at that time, they weren't talking to each other, the Palestinians, the Israelis. And of course, they still aren't. And so 18 Palestinian and Israeli women came to Esalen for 10 days, I think. And I got some of our leading teachers to volunteer their time to work with these women so that they could have the conversations that they could not even be in the same room to have at home. That was the kind of thing that made me proud, really proud of what we could offer.
We could be a leader in that area.
Something that I've been very focused on for the last few years is to make more scholarships available for the public programs. That in and of itself is going to make Esalen go out into the world.
Is there an Esalen without this property? And if so, what is it?
Where do we take this? Now that we've experienced an opening, a transformation, and internal healing, what next? How do we leave Esalen and share what we've gotten for ourselves with the world?